Find a seat if you can.
Hello YouTube, and today I have for you 5 types of cards that would be interesting added into standard mode. Now I'd just like to say that these are my ideas, and I think they would be pretty interesting. And I'm going to add a slight disclaimer that I'm not affiliated with Blizzard, and that I'm not sure if they will or will not add any of these, but they probably won't. If you have any ideas, comments, or other types of cards that you think would be interesting, feel free to post in the comments below. So first, let's start with the one thing that's already in the game, which is anti-spell cards. It's already in the game, so I'm not going to spend long on this. We have Loatheb and Counterspell, but Loatheb isn't in standard, and Counterspell only applies to one class, which is Mage. What I was thinking was more of anti-spell minions, just like Loatheb, or like a Mana Wraith for spells. Alright, so the next thing is armor removal, and I'm not talking about minion attacks or charge. The goal of this armor removal would be not too extreme like pre-nerf Alexstrasza, but also not too weak. With a couple cards added in Whispers like Feral Rage, armor removal targeting around 4 armor wouldn't seem too OP or bad, as it would target 3 classes. Put into perspective with anti-secret cards, which also only target 3 classes, and armor removal isn't that bad. Plus, removing a little armor wouldn't hurt too much if a warrior has Justicar, but it sure lowers the chance of a pesky stall by control warrior decks. Good synergy with combo and other mechanics may even give control priests and even other priests a spot in the meta. Anyways, it isn't like Shield Slam isn't a removal these days. With most decks, when you place out a threat, the next turn makes Shield Slam go from this to this. And let's not forget about Ancient Shield Bearer. Which brings us to our next point, Anti-Cthun cards. Blizzard really pushed Cthulhu this expansion, but there isn't a direct counter, unless you count Nerubian Warlord or pseudo anti-battlecry cards like Mana Wraith, even though Nerubian Warlord actually isn't available in standard. Honestly, it isn't Cthulhu that needs such a counter as much as the cards revolving around it once it hits 10 attack and health. I'd rather a few cards to lower its stats now and then so we have a chance to stop Twin Vekler. Don't even get me started. Or maybe it's just that my salt from not getting a single legendary out of packs since Whispers of the Old Gods launched. Well, with those out of the way, we can delve into the super interesting / controversial topics of types of cards. Let me just say that these types of cards probably wouldn't ever be put in a game unless it's a one-time card, and maybe probably be banned in Tavern Brawl and pretty much all modes except for its own. But nonetheless, in standard this would be very interesting. Anti-Rng would be very interesting at the least, and alter any RNG except for card draw for the next turn. There are 2 paths this could go down. The card could be a card that just completely eliminates RNG for the next turn, except for the card draw. Basically, if a knife juggler had to juggle on anything other than a clear board, it wouldn't juggle. This isn't very viable, as once there is a 1 health minion on the board and enough juggles for lethal, then it may be a bit of a problem. Unless, of course, this is looked out as a stall or an explanation that I'll get into later. The second way this card mechanic could go down is letting the opponent choose the RNG for card draw, an example being choosing which minion the juggle hits, and the opponent that has to choose gets a timer of about maybe 7 seconds before it's randomized, just so the opponent doesn't rope with an interaction turn, which would be very interesting to interact. The problem with this way is that it's kind of hard when stuff like Yogg Saron or the 3/2 that summons a random 1-cost minion appears, and you have to choose from those. Unless Blizzard already has a code to check for lethal and allow or disallow RNG in certain, I guess, situations. The first way would take forever to actually code or make and execute perfectly, while the second would have to be very well thought out and possibly just might not be possible due to having to have a platform based on the mobile as well. Maybe adding a discover mechanic instead of every standard spell would allow Yogg-Saron's RNG's Hope card to be played in a circumstance that this anti-RNG card is played, but even then there'd be RNG, and basing a code possibly on one legendary, or I guess set of cards, most likely going to be a legendary, who has a special mechanic to alter tons of cards is not very viable. Finally, turn triggers, not like the rage mode you get when you get triggered, but cards which trigger the beginning and ends of turns without giving mana. There's a couple alternatives which I'll explain shortly, but the first mode is kind of like a feign death to death rattles, in which triggers will trigger the starts and ends of turns. This would affect minions like Doomsayer and Ragnaros, which is the problem here is if a turn trigger costs less than 2 and Ragnaros is on an empty board, then it can deal 16 damage, while a Doomsayer could clear the board for sure in less than a turn. Ideally, the solution is to make the triggers cost at least 4, but also be worded in a way that shows that you don't get mana, and rather card effects such as Tharson and Lightspawn are affected. There also has to be a clear clarification on when opponents' start turns begin, and discussion on if they get their start turn triggers on your end turn triggers. This is not simple and would be the obstacle to why this wouldn't be added in the game, but nonetheless this would be very interesting. An extra discounted mana cost, damage, etc., you get the point, would be very interesting to standard and even all of Hearthstone. I mean, imagine Dreadscales could do 2 damage, and that would pretty much be the end of Token Druid. I mean, not that I have anything against them or anything. The second alternative to actual start or end turn triggers is of course the cards that make these effects happen twice, like Brand's Bronzebeard. But it would of course have to be sure not to target Death Rattles or Battle Cries, as we already have legendaries which target double of both. The third alternative to this is making a card trigger twice, similar to Princess Huron, in which the Death Rattle minion triggers its Death Rattle, and in that situation a Ragnaros would do 16 damage, but of course it wouldn't happen along with every other trigger, which would be also interesting. Anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. Again, add comments or types of cards that would be interesting to standard, and please comment on my types as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you.